And we're back. It's COP305, and it's the winter 2016 semester, and it's week 4, lesson 4, part 2. We just finished doing some simple trigger collisions, right? And we used this little script here. We created a couple of audio sounds, and now I want to talk about some scoring, right? So I want to set up the values first. Before we actually set up scoring and everything else, we need to have a container for them. How do I want to kind of set up a score, right? So as I go, something's going to keep track of my score. And it's certainly not going to be my plane, right? Let's think about the complexity of what we've done, right? It's actually quite easy what we've done. And let me just go into Unity. How about I open Unity for the first time? So, by the way, everything that I've done so far is up on GitHub in our little GitHub project. It's there. So again, it would be under COMP305 Winter 2016 Mail Pilot. So if you wanted to follow along and you couldn't make yours work like me, you can certainly go up and load your project, and as long as you're using Unity 5X, it should work for you, right? Okay, let's take a look at this. So here's the complexity of what we've done. We've piled everything into our plane, which is our player object, right? Our game controller controls how many clouds come in, which is now 3. I can make it more if I want to or less. That's 1. But we really don't have any method, as an example, to kind of keep track of score. Now, there's a couple of things we can do. We could make it so that we have a separate object that keeps track of our score as well, right? But for the simplicity's sakes, what if we set up some values in our game object, in our game controller, and we made references to every time something collided, right? Every time I have a collision, right? I would check every frame to see if I have a collision. If my collision is true, if I have a collision, right? Then my score gets added into. That's one way I could do it, right? So my game controller gets added into. The other way to do it would be this. I can share my game controller variables like we've done before, right? How do we do that before? Well, we did it with cloud, right? Notice that we kind of made a connection to the cloud object inside the game controller, but really what we're doing is making a reference to the cloud controller itself. Well, we're going to do the same thing with our game controller. Our game controller, we're going to reference our game controller, right, from our engine, from our plane. So my plane is going to say, hey, add, a score or a life to my game controller. That's what we're going to do, right? Whatever the game controller is. And when I add this score to the game controller, right, I want the game controller to update my score. Okay? This is more tricky, and this might take us a little bit of today and some of parts of next day when we get together. And the reason for that is because we're going to start today, but we have to think about how this works. There's a bit of coding involved and some references between scripts. Okay? Again, we could have piled all the logic for the sounds in our game controller as well and set up some ways of doing that. In other words, by sharing or exposing objects on the game controller, right? We could have done that too. So again, I'm trying to make it as easy for you as to get this thing done as possible. Then we'll talk about, and I want to hear some critique from you guys. If we're going to make a game like this, how could we refine, right? Like we talked about just now, how we add the clouds coming different places, right? How about explosions instead of like just sounds? Because sounds doesn't really do a lot for me. I want some kind of physical feedback for the player to see explosions. How do I do an explosion? How do I make the propellers move on the plane? So have a little bit of animation. How do I do that in a very simple way? Those kind of things that we can add in. How about bullets firing from the player's plane? How do I do that? And what is he really hitting anyway if he's going to fire bullets? How about some kind of visual, something that I pick up on the island, right? As opposed to just me passing over the island, like a coin. I have a coin spinning and I pass over it and I pick it up, right? That kind of stuff. There's other refinements we can make on this game to make it better. That would be like version 2. This is like, we're not even really at version 1 yet, right? We don't have a full game system yet, right? Your assignment 1 is for version 1, like really just getting the basics done. Then version 2, if you really wanted to, you can continue with that. And maybe you want to for your final project. Your final project could be 3 levels of your assignment number 1. What you're making right now is a prototype of your first level, and then you make some refinements and you add your second level and your third level with a couple of screens, your menu scene, your game scenes, level 1, level 2, level 3, and then your game over scene. That's really what your final assignment is about. You might choose assignment 1 for that, right? You may not. You may say, hey, I don't want to do that. I want to do a platformer, which a lot of people did last semester, right? Or, you know what? I don't want to do a 2D game at all. I want to make a 3D game, which is much more challenging. If you want to challenge yourself with your partners, go ahead, right? You can challenge yourself and make a 3D game. That's more challenging to do. It's fun, but a lot more challenging. All right, so let's think about what we want to do here. So our game controller has a script. It's called this game controller script, right? So I'm going to go into scripts, and I'm going to look at my game controller script. And what I want to do here is I want to keep track of my score, my score values inside my game controller. That's what I want to do, right? Now, going back to C#, who remembers how to make getters and setters in C#, right? Because we need to do this to make this work properly the way I want it. And I'll tell you why. If I just assign values to a public property, right? If all I do is assign values to it, without a getter, or so without a setter, I have no control of what happens. I just assign the value. With a setter method, what I can do is I can assign the value and trigger an update to my scoreboard. All right, I can't do it in any other way. All right, so I want you to think about that. So that's why I need setters, getters and setters for my values. I'm going to use getters and setters this time. It's the first time we're using actual real C# stuff, real C# code. The rest of it's all been API stuff. No real C#. Some minor things about looping and if statements. But at the end of the day, you know, there hasn't been a lot of C# here in this course, right? Not really. This is the first time we're going to do that. So first we're going to make some private instance variables. Follow me here, all right? Okay, so we need two. We need lives, and it's not a lives, it's a lives value and a scores value. All right, that's what we want. The value of the lives and the scores, which we want to also set up initially as 0, right? For 0 for a score and 5, let's say 5 lives, I'm saying, right? Okay, let's try this out. So we'll say private, and it's going to be integers, because I don't care about having, you know, scoring that's like points, unless you want to make that for your game, like, you know, 0.3 points, you know, whatever, right? For me, I'm going to keep it simple. It's going to be integers. All right, so private integer, and we're going to call this my, we'll start off with score. So score value, right? The reason why I'm saying score value is there might be also a score label, right? I don't want to mix those up, right? So score value. Okay, I'm not going to assign a value for it here. Private int, as an example, would be life or lives value. Let's call it lives value, so more than one life. Okay, there we go. There's a couple things here. Can I access private variables outside of my class? I need a getter and setter. How do I write getters and setters for my lives value and scores value? Now in Visual Studio, all you would have to do is right-click and then do something like, you know, refactor, you know, and then you could kind of declare, or, you know, declare your getters and setters, right? How do I make getters and setters, as an example, for my score value and my life value? What do I do? So I want to make my public, we'll make another area over here, right, where we say, you know, public, access methods. All right, that's what these are. These are public access methods. I'm putting them before my constructor for a second. So how do I make, does anyone remember how to make getters and setters? Help me out here, right? This is just very regular C#. Guys, you're killing me. You don't know how to make these things? What do you do if you don't remember? Please do it, right? Google it, right? For God's sake, Google it. You don't know how to do it, Google it, right? How do you do it? Tell me. Getters and setters, easy way to do it. I have to make the name of my value. First of all, it's got to be public. That's the first thing I need to do, right? So it's got to be a public method. It's got to be a public int that I'm going to set or get, right? That's the first thing, right? So if I make a getter, right, it's going to return something, right? So my public, it's got to be a public, right? Is that the first thing? And then I want to make, with my public, I want to add in a return type, which is going to be called int. So if I'm going to get it something, this is what it's going to be: public int, and then the name of my variable I'm getting, right? Sorry, score value with a capital, right? So I'm getting my score value, and now what? Open brace, close brace. Okay, cool. There's my score value. This is my public, and then I'm going to start typing get, right? Open brace, yep. Open brace or open bracket? Open brace or parentheses?
No, open brace.
Open brace. There we go. Okay, good. And then? Return.
Underscore score value.
Okay, that's nice. That's nice and easy, right? Would that be correct?
Yes.
That's your getter. That's your getter for my score value. Let's get the setter done for my score value. How do I do my setter for my score value by hand?
No,
Now-
just after get the do, right?
I could. I was just trying to help you, right? Okay, so here, set, right? Here we are. And same kind of, same structure, right? Hold on a second. Now here's where I set something. And if I set my score value,
Underscore score value.
right, this dot underscore score value, right, is equal to value. There you go. Getter and setter. Now this is the great getter and setter for a score value. But can I put extra stuff in here? This is where the power of getters and setters are, because I can program this method to have additional steps, other things that I notify that I can't do by just setting it my instance variable directly. And that's why you use private instance variables and public properties, these getters and setters. Okay, we're going to do that later. So let's put this out. Okay, we're just prepping. Let's do the same thing for our lives value. So public, and we'll say int for our lives value. We'll call this lives value, right? And then inside there, we're going to also put in our get. Here's our getter. And we're also going to put our setter. Just set that up. Okay, and using the same kind of idea, we'll say return this dot underscore lives value. And by the way, we probably want to just keep the same. We'll probably put this as this. And the same thing with our setter. We'll say this dot underscore lives value is equal to value. Again, we can do other things there when we do that. Okay, so we got our getters and setters. That's cool, right? I like it. I like it. Now we need to set some initialize. Hey, we have an initialize method here. Remember we did that? And you're like, why would you do an initialize method than a start method? Well, here's why, right? Inside here, I want to initialize some values. So I'm going to do something like this. So when I first kick off my game object, I'm going to say this dot underscore lives value. I could do that. Why don't we just use the getter or the setter? We can do the setter right here, can we? Because they've been written. So I could do that. I could say something like this. I could say this dot, you know, and I'll put it like this, score value, right, is equal to the capital S, because it's a setter, right? I can make it equal to 0, right? And I'll say the same thing. This dot lives value now, because that'll be available to me, is also equal to 0. So I set that up for the first time. Oh, lives value should probably be 5. There you go. Make sense? Now, if I do it here, and again, we talked about this, if I do it here, will it be exposed? Will these public, that's the thing to ask yourself, will these public getters and setters be exposed on the inspector? Let's see if that works. Okay, so if I go back to, and do I want them to be? If I go back to my Unity, and if I look at my game controller, do I see anything else in here that's exposed? Go back and go forward. Do I see anything? No. And the reason for this is because Unity knows that getters and setters, unless you specifically serialize them, they'll not be exposed. Okay, that's the thing. One thing to do. The other thing is we learned by example last time. Notice how when I did it here and I set it to 3 or whatever, it automatically set a value. So if I want these values to be controlled by the inspector, there's two ways: serialize them, right? Or, which we're not going to talk about right now, or unfortunately, set them up here, right? So let's try that. So if I set my score value to 0 here, and I set my lives value, but these are private. Should they show up?
No.
Right? So, got a problem. How do I do that, right? So that wouldn't make a difference anyway, because they're private, right? Unless I make them public. And if I make them public, I defeat the purpose of doing all this, right? I'm just showing you when you're thinking, when you're writing your script, what you might run into. You're trying to plan the script out. Okay, cool. Let's leave it as is for now. We don't care if we can't control it for now. We'll tackle that other option down here later. There's ways of exposing it on the inspector. We'll do it after. Okay, cool. The next piece is this. Once we've got this piece, I want to make a reference to my game controller object inside my plane controller, my plane collider, right? How do I do that? So I'm going to go to my game collider script, which is my plane collider, which is right here. Right? Now you can double click on it to make it. And I want to make a reference to it. It's going to be a public reference because I'm going to drag and drop like I did last time. So in here, we're going to say we're going to make some public instance variables that we want to kind of expose on the inspector. We're going to call it public, and we're going to make it of type game controller, right? Which we're going to call lowercase game controller. Yay. Okay, cool. When we do that, if I go back up to Unity, right? If I click the right one, and if I go to plane, notice how my game controller now has a space, right? Underneath my script, my collider script. Remember, that's why I put my script at the bottom. My collider script now has a space where I can drag and drop, and I can simply drag and drop my game controller script in there. Yay, I made that connection. So once I drag and drop my game controller, I create a binding between my game controller and the variable that I've mentioned here in MonoDevelop called lowercase game controller, right? Okay, cool. So there's my game controller. Let me go back to Unity for a second. Notice how in Unity it's all uppercase, game controller, because it rewrites whatever it exposed in the inspector. It kind of makes it so it looks like an actual value. All right, so this is my game controller. I've made it. Now, do I have access to lives, and do I have access to score, right? Because every time I want to do it, I want to access those values. Let's do that. So I'll go back to my script, and inside here, not only do I want to play this, but I want to say my game controller dot lives, right? If I hit my island, I want to add 1 to my score, or 100, let's say. So let's try this. I'm going to say this game controller dot, do I have access to lives value? My lives value, look at this, I have it. Lives value is equal to, or plus equal to, 100. There it is, right? And I can do the same thing with my, I'll bring it up as much as I can here for you guys. I can do the same thing with after I play my sound, I want to decrease my life value. So I say this dot game controller, tell my game controller that the lives value has been decreased minus equal to 1, or what's the other way to write a decrease, a decrement, minus minus, right? I could do that too. Let's just leave it at minus equal to 1 for now. Because then we can change that the way the mechanic works later. Okay, cool. So that's kind of here. Yeah, that would be good. Yeah, score value. Thank you for that. You guys are watching. You guys are paying attention. And notice how I got the code hinting, right? I got the code hinting because we made this connection. Number one, that's the first thing. We have to make this connection on thing. I've dragged and dropped from my game controller, right? From my game controller script, the actual game controller object. I've made a connection to this plane object here. That's the first thing we're doing, is making a binding. And then I've exposed the two values as public values through getters and setters. I could have made just regular public values, but that's not going to do what I want them to do. I want them, when I set the value, it updates my scoreboard too, which we don't have yet. But I'm prepping for that. That's why I've made getters and setters. Yes? Here, and thing. So my game controller, I've dragged and dropped my game controller object. Notice if I go to my plane, I've dragged and dropped my game controller object into the space where it's listening for the script. And what it's going to do, Unity's smart enough to know that I'm listening for the script that's connected to my game controller. That's what I'm listening for. Make sense? So I've kind of made a binding. So the game controller, right? The game controller knows, right, that about the plane, about the cloud, because in its own script, my game controller itself, it has a connection to the cloud, right? The cloud prefab. And then the plane knows about the game controller because I've dragged and dropped this game controller in here. Any questions around that? Let's test it, right? Because we want to try to test it out. And the best way to test it, to prove what I'm saying, is inside my game controller. So let's show you what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to go back to my game controller script. And notice where I have my setters. So when I set the score value, I want to do something else too. I want to do a console.log, right? So let's do that. So I'll say a debug.log. That's my equivalent to my console.log. And I can do this, by the way, before or after I do my set. So I'll say debug.log. Actually, let's do it after. It'll make more sense, right? Debug.log. And we'll say this._score value, right? Because that's the one we want to expose. And do the same thing with the lives value. Debug.log. This is like we're doing a scoreboard, right? Debug.log. This._lives value. So we're doing just showing this, we're just exposing what's happening here for our debugging purposes. Let's try this out and see if it works. So I'm going to go back to Unity, and I'm going to press play. And then let's see what happens. So start off, I've got 3 lives,
Yay.
I've got 100 points, right?
Yay.
I got 1 life, I got 0 life, I'm dead. Let's show you that. Here's my log. So I start off with 0 score and 5 lives, right? And then I went to 4, right, and 3. I'm not really saying what's happening here. Here's 100 points. Here's 200 points. I finished at 200 points. And then I went to -2. I went to a -2 life level, right? Which means I got hit so much, my game didn't stop when I went to -2, right? Hey, here it is. If my game goes to -2, that's a trigger. If my game goes to 0, that's a trigger. I want to stop my game when I go to 0, right? I can listen for when my game goes to 0. I can test for it right here when I set it. If my game goes to 0, don't post 0, do something, right? Because that's what I can do with my setter. My setter gives me all the space to do all the logic I want, right? Okay. So that's the kind of the trick that we do here. So let's stop here because we kind of ran out of time. But the key is, this is keeping track of our score already inside of our game controller. The next step is setting up, in the next time we get together, we're going to set up our scoreboard and a simple UI that we can update when we set the values of our score and our lives. Okay? Guys, I'll see you next day. It'll be Wednesday. We will have a little quiz next day when we get together, so please be prepared. Think about the stuff we talked about today, that's fair ground, as well as stuff we did last week. Okay, so if we talked about anything, like in terms of stuff we do in Unity, those are the things. I'm only gonna ask you 5 questions still, but it could be any of those kind of 5 questions. If you're working with Unity and you've been working on your game, you should be fine. Okay? Thanks so much.